Hello, this is a presentation by Wesley Dilday, narrated by Wesley Dilday, about King Henry V. This will cover all of his life, and at the end, some of my opinion on the comparison between how he's depicted in the Shakespearean play and how he actually was. Cover some basic information, then we'll go on to pictures where I will talk, and at the very end of each slide, tell you which website I used to find out this information. Born in 1386 and died at the age of 36 in 1422. He had a very short life, King Henry V, of course, as a lot of kings did those days. He became king at the age of 25, some say 26. The actual age really varies because his birth wasn't totally sure, because at the time of his birth, his family wasn't important enough to have it written down. He fought in many battles, including the battles against the Percys at Shrewsbury. This was presented in the play, but actually more historically famous, he fought against the French in the Hundred Years' War. A particular battle was the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. He was heavily outnumbered, but still managed to pull off a victory. This led to the English domination over France for a short period of time, at which point he married into the French aristocracy, and then, tragically, he died unexpectedly of dysentery at his last military campaign. The early life of King Henry V. He was born in this castle in 1386. This castle is called the Monmouth Castle. Since his family wasn't important enough, like I said, his exact date was unknown. His parents were Henry of Bolingbroke and Mary de Beaune. At this point, Henry V was just the great grandson of Edward II. This information was found on the History Channel website. I'll show you all the websites at the very end. After his father's exile, Henry was in the care of Richard II. He was treated nicely and was even part of the royal service and accompanied Richard II on diplomatic missions, particularly to Ireland. Once his father finally came back out of exile, he formed a revolution, kind of, and kicked out the king. And this was when Henry IV was made. Henry was now the Prince of Wales as a result. This information was brought to you by Britannica. Uh, on this website, they have a picture of this, and this is their house. All the Henrys. This is House Lancaster. Less than 3 years later, Henry was wrapped up in his father's political maneuvering already. Fighting alongside his father, they both were able to quell the rebellion against the throne. This is the Battle of Shrewsbury, which is heavily depicted in the Shakespearean play, kind of the main premise, actually. Uh, Henry himself received a face wound during the battle, which left him scarred on his face forever. All of his portraits show the good side of him and doesn't show his scarred face. I guess he was self-conscious about it. Henry's father at this point, after the battle, of course, was falling into a very bad illness, and it left the prince to deal with most of the policies to the throne. And every time he fell into the illness and recovered, he would always redo everything the prince did. This information was brought to you by the Britannica. The particular information about the Shrewsbury and this picture, the death of Hotspur, which we see in the play, is actually from a website from the UK Battle Resource. Any battle that happened in the UK, they have it, and they show all the maps and some pictures. At this point, Henry is pretty much the king. He's running the country, even though he doesn't have the title. When he isn't putting down the Welsh revolt of Owen Glendower in 1408, he's also enforcing policy. Sadly, his policy ideals always differed with the king, so this boiled over. So he eventually had Henry actually thrown off the royal council in 1411, so he couldn't make any more of these decisions. These disagreements may be represented in the play with him having a poor relationship. This is very real. They did have a poor relationship. This information was found on the History Channel website, and this picture was also found there. This just shows Henry doing some diplomatic stuff with the Prince of Wales. He was legitimizing his son, the Thomas Hickley's sons. Eventually, Henry IV finally died on March 1413. and Henry V was crowned at Westminster Abbey, which is depicted in this picture. This is obviously a much more modern picture. Henry at first was a very good king, and he let things that were in the past stay in the past. He allowed for Mortimer, which was Richard II's like relatives, to finally have their titles and land restored. But on the other hand, he was also quick to punish those who threatened the crown. Some people saw Henry as tactful and cunning, and others saw him as calculating and ruthless. Henry also, it's important to note that he implemented the English language to be used in the government, which was the first in 350 years. This was said on the history website, and some of the information was also found on the Britannica website. Once again, we'll get to each website at the very end of the presentation. His diplomacy. With the same home front, much of King Henry V's diplomacy was mainly war. This was all overseas, which of course I mean against the French. This picture is just some gold coins that he had implemented. I figured it'd be a good picture to look at. On to the campaigns. The first campaign, and arguably the most famous, was the 1415 campaign. In August, Henry turned his sights on France, beginning with the fortress at Harfleur, then Calais, and finally the very decisive victory in Agincourt. Agincourt, Henry was outnumbered, some say 3-1, but somehow he still managed to win. He had all the prisoners killed. This is the dark side of Henry. Every time he goes into battle, it seems he gets darker and darker. The next campaign, 1417 to 1420, after the resupply and the constant naval battles that were happening between each campaign, Henry recommitted his forces in France. He landed in Normandy and Rouen. By this time, he was very cruel to citizens, and he killed some of the men all over the age of 12, in some say. This could be propaganda against the king, but there's enough information there that it could be a valid point. By 1420, he was outside of Paris, and Paris was feeling the squeeze, so they signed the Treaty of Troyes, and then married into French aristocracy. He married Catherine of Valois. This was the French king's daughter. In 1421, said to be his last campaign, because of obvious reasons, it was mainly led by his younger brother. He brought English defeat at the Battle of Bog against the Scottish army. It was a pretty bad defeat, and it weighed heavy on Henry's heart because Thomas actually died during the fighting. And then on August 31st, 1422, Henry died at the Chateau de Vicines from dysentery. This is the Chateau de Vicines. All this information, again, was brought to you by the History website, History Channel website. They have a lot of the information on the battles. He died in the castle of Vicines. Henry's comrade in arms and Lord Steward John Sutton I, first Baron of Dudley, brought his body back all the way to England, and they bore a royal standard funeral. Henry V was buried at Westminster Abbey, where he was crowned on November 7th, 1422. Henry V named his brother John of Lancaster, 1st Duke of Bedford, Regent of France, in the name of his son Henry VI of England. At the time, he was only a few months old. This information was also brought to you by the History Channel website and some of the Britannica as well. And that was his entire life. Now, for my opinion, Shakespeare's play, I think, does a pretty poor job at portraying the true King Henry V. I mean, his early life was full of education and eagerness to learn from his mentors, and as the play, he's depicted completely different. I mean, before he was even king, he knew bloodshed and learned how to inspire troops to turn the tide of battle, which he displayed against the French over and over, until his last campaign, of course. Later in his life, I mean, he was ruthless against prisoners, and he was also politically cunning to keep a home front under wraps while also fighting a battle in France. It makes me wonder why the prince is portrayed as such a happy-go-lucky guy in the play, and it makes him also look like a failure who has a plan to one day step up as the king. But I mean, in real life, he was planning on being king even when he was younger. But maybe that makes a better story. Here's the citations. If you can't really follow this, the next power slide right here has the links for everything. All the information I found was on these links. The two Britannica sites are about the early life and his death, whereas the History Channel really covers all of the nitty gritty battles. And then I included the Battlefield Trust website that talked about the Battle of Shrewsbury, since it's covered in the play. The pictures that I use in the background, I found either using these websites because they were kind of hot linked, so you can click on them and you can find the pictures, or I found a picture after the hot link for a more detailed, high resolution picture. And that's it. This has been Wesley Dilday, and it's been a pleasure. Have a good day. Thanks.